paper, this information carrier. We have just reprogrammed here this piece of paper to have a value above 20 euros. So if we establish that truth on this piece of paper, that it is not worth 20 euros, or what is on top of it, let's say the amount of offers accumulated to 30 euros. The fact that this piece of paper is now worth 30 euros, how do we share that truth outside of this room? Right? Just a thought experiment to start with. And maybe it tells a bit about the interaction of blockchain, which was not actually in the white paper, of course, of Satoshi, just as the word investment. But and the notion of, do blockchains need currencies, or let's use a better word, tokens, as information carriers, that some truth is going from A to B, some information? Well, just questions. We have an awesome program. We'll dive into that later. But first, I would like to ask you a big hand of applause for Petra Hielkema, because we are here at the Dutch Central Bank, and I think that's awesome. Petra.
Thank you. Thank you, Rutger. And thank you all for being here. I think it's great to see you all here and to discuss distributed ledger blockchain on the birthday.
Just take a seat, relax. So before we move to Ernestine and Scott, I would like to tell a bit about the deep dives. We do them as part of the preparation for the biggest hackathon in Europe, which used to be, aka the biggest blockchain hackathon in the world. I think it's very important that all the potential clients that work with the teams at the hackathon, and the people from the Dutch Central Bank and the Authority for Financial Markets are there, and many other policymakers from ministries and the EU, is that we learn as much as we can before the hackathon takes place, so that we can build the best solutions. And if we stick with the problems a bit longer, well, then eventually and discuss them with all kinds of points of view, then we get something better out of that. So today we have Ernestine Meijer. She's going to talk about especially the integrity of the whole the payment system we have, and the AML-D5 regulations that could be actually it could be an opportunity for new players. And Scott Nelson, CEO of Sweetbridge. And Sweetbridge is developing a commonized economic protocol for more efficient or more effective supply chains. And they have traveled the whole world in getting that right at the regulatory level. So that's very exciting to hear his learnings and his view on what can be done in the Netherlands, because it's not exactly the first time you're here and doing already a lot of business here. Then more from the investor and international blockchain development boutique point of view, Cassius Kiani. He's working with Stephen Tual, and they have some interesting experience, of course, with the DAO in 2016, as well as talking with all kinds of international regulators on how to move their projects forward, because some of those projects are tokenized. And then Martijn Wismeijer and quite, I would say, famous in the Dutch crypto scene, because you actually have stored some bitcoins in your hand, right? Yeah, and on a chip. And he distributes cryptocurrency ATMs, and he's now over 2,000 ATMs with tens of millions of revenue each week, that is. Month, okay, but that's growing rapidly, and it's very interesting because how are they handling all the regulatory stuff that you need to take into account. And after that, you can pick your favorite speaker and really dive deeper into what exactly do you want to know from them. So we don't do the Q&A plenary; we do that for each speaker. And then, of course, drinks. As you can see, we have some slack in the program because we have enough time to have the drinks. So take your time today. Feel relaxed. We're not regulated here, so we can just talk to each other if you want to know everything. I mean, this is to establish a dialogue between different worlds who not very often meet, and they can learn a lot from each other. What the DutchChain Discovery Program is all about is creating collaborative, interconnected communities that develop and use public digital infrastructure. If we look at, for example, the digital payments infrastructure, it's publicly used, it's privately owned. It's what we know from Google, it's what we know from Facebook, it's what we know from Twitter. And there's an alternative. Suddenly it was there. And that's, of course, the public version of a payment network. And it's called Bitcoin, or you can do it with Ethereum or Litecoin or whatever. But now we have public payment networks that are owned by no one and can be used by everyone. Petra was talking about access. Do I have access in the payment system in a way that I can create another banking app? Well, I would love to. So what we are looking for is solutions. Solutions where we see the extension of our digital infrastructure, our public digital infrastructure, which everybody can use, no one owns. We move away from the Uber model where you own the market, where you own that protocol, and we move towards a new balance between the public and the private. Not only the public sector and the private sector, but also the actual public and me as a private business owner or a private person, a sovereign human being that wants to contribute in networks. And we have all kinds of needs to register and communicate all kinds of truths globally. So that's what we are looking for. And we're doing that already for the third year, discovering by actually building it. And we expect about 100 teams for the hackathon in April. So the whole program is growing quite a lot, because last year we had 64 teams. Who was there last year at the hackathon? Okay, so if you want to share experiences, feel free. And that's why we choose the hashtag commonization, because a common solution is something that nobody owns and everybody can use. Or everybody can own it, and but everybody have to be able to use it. Let's say the system of traffic is quite a nice example of a commonized system. We will this year look more and more with all the partners in the topic of commonization and to see how we can build new markets by unlocking new common protocols. And that's what this new chapter is all about. We feel that if there's still a centralized strategy, blockchain might not be the way to go. For example, IBM and Maersk, they publicly basically admitted that it is very hard to adopt the protocol. Why? They own the IP and it is an incremental change. But owning that IP is a huge dilemma for other partners to be on board of that consortium. You see all the consortia of the same breed of companies. Well, actually the consortium where there are a lot of different companies together, they are the most interesting ones. So our partners also that contribute the challenges for the teams to work on, they will be looking for partners to work with across many different industries, because that's basically where the magic happens. So I invite you all to open up that new chapter where we move away from Bitcoin is money to more like what can we do with tokens as information carriers in these kind of new public infrastructures. And where we move away from blockchain being mostly used as a database plus towards where can it actually make a difference. And everybody's here to find out. And everybody is here to help with that, help each other as well. Because every time a new protocol sees the light, a new market sees the light, there is no competition in this field, because it's non-existent and we are creating it as we speak. So that's, I think, the exciting part, especially because we are here, because nowhere in the world these people come together and discuss it in a way we are doing today. So that's why it's very important that you all are here. I would like to invite Ernestine Meijer to the stage. Please give a warm hand of applause, because we promised technologies for both new and pre-existing products. Well, somebody with a big interest in the status quo has written that line. Yeah, I'm really worried about that one, as not as a business owner, but as a human being. Well, it's not really something to laugh about, I think. But I'm very curious on taking that conversation also forward on that level. We're 15 minutes past time, but again we have all the time this afternoon. Let's get ready for Scott Nelson. He just moved from Atlanta to London. And Sweetbridge, Vinay Gupta is working in their team. Also, Don Tapscott is working in their team. They have done so much research. And the interesting thing is that what they also found out is that you need basically all the compliance to the regulatory frameworks at the protocol level. So perhaps not even on the organizational level. If you're a wallet provider or an exchange, but actually on the protocol level, because what happens when the wallet provider is not an organization, or if the exchange is fully distributed and does not have any legal entity, or maybe in Malta and Gibraltar or anywhere, but you get across different types of conversations then, and I think those are really interesting when they own themselves. Anyway, Scott, I'm eager to learn what you have learned. Take it away. A warm hand of applause.
Thank you,
Scott Nelson, please.
And I can't believe how perfectly you set this up for me. This is a personal journey. I'm going to talk about some things that the space doesn't talk about. I'm going to get dirty. I'm going to reveal things that nobody reveals, and I'm going to talk about the bad, the good, and the ugly. Because if we don't have honest conversations and if we're not transparent, we can't actually fix things. To kind of begin with, I don't know what you think of Buckminster Fuller, but he had an interesting set of architectural innovations, one of which was the geodesic dome. And he said, you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And we have taken that at heart. We believe that to create a new model is the right answer if you want to actually make something better. And the regulatory concerns of governments are valid. They are based on hundreds of years of bad things happening, of people doing and manipulating financial systems, of people stealing money, of defrauding and harming others, of manipulating instruments, of doing all sorts of bad things. And in the last 30, 40 years, there has been massive improvements in anti-money laundering worldwide. Massive. And we have, for the first time, actually done things that no government's going to walk away from, such as improve GDP by actually bringing more of what's happening out of the gray market or black market into the white market. And in new technologies, when they evolve, a lot of people focus on the technology, but the really important thing is always to look at the model. The technology is valuable and interesting. In the internet, we created a new business that's generating about $130 billion a year of tools, website creation, web hosting, all the things that are the technology-related stuff. But just one new business model that was enabled by the internet, online shopping, is $2.5 trillion, growing at 22% a year. This is way faster than any other economic sector in all of economic activity worldwide. And if that continues, we'll completely absorb the vast majority of all the way we purchase goods and services in society. So new models are really the thing to focus on. Now, I want to suggest that we have entirely missed the point of Bitcoin. On this, the anniversary of the white paper being published 10 years ago. I want to introduce this from a different point of view. It is not about a financial instrument, though it is. It's not that you can speculate and create something that doesn't have any value backing it at all. We had tulips before, so we kind of understand that. It's that you can create a reward system that gets people to spend hundreds of millions of euros a month on hardware and electricity to run the world's largest computer network, 10 times larger than all of the of the computing power of the Fortune 500 companies combined, that's never gone down and never been hacked, has no central board of directors, has no organizational structure whatsoever, and is entirely driven by a reward system. Now that is actually new. Speculative instruments were not new. That is not the news flash. 100 years from now, that will not be the thing we go back and say, wow, that was the big deal. The blockchain enables something truly new, truly unique, and that is that the commons can replace the firm. That is not that the commons will replace the firm. I'm not saying that there are not going to be firms, but I'm saying that this is the new economic evolution. This is transformative. This is as big as what happened here in the creation of the West India Company, and the East Indian Company, thank you. And the trading that was empowered because of the risk pooling of sending ships that would mostly not return. That was a big deal. And creating the corporate structure, the identity of the firm, was a big transformation. This is a bigger transformation than that. Now, we can do this with rewards that are kind of scary and a bit weird. First, we can now create new financial instruments that haven't been able to exist before. We can use something other than money as a reward, and this is good because we don't need to actually increase the money supply and risk inflation to basically do this. And we can create truly decentralized entities. These are entities which act like a firm, have pooling of capital, have pooling of risk, and have pooling of production, but which are not a firm in the sense that they are not centrally managed, and they are operated for the benefit of the group. Now, the problem is that with any new idea, we have a tendency to compare the new idea with the existing model. And the new ideas are clunky, they're risky, they're new, so they aren't very well thought through. They have lots of problems. You don't want to get on that airplane and fly across the Atlantic Ocean. That would be a very bad idea. It's also not a really good replacement for the moving of large quantities of freight compared to a freight train. But it was a fundamentally important invention. And the thing that we so frequently miss is that technologies evolve, and they are right now evolving faster and faster than we've ever seen before. As of this year, we are now reinventing the entire knowledge base of the world every something between 90 and 120 days. Let that sink in. What I mean by that is that the amount of accumulated knowledge is doubling every 90 to 120 days. Okay? That's a stunning thing. And if you've worked in this space, a year in this space is like a decade in any other thing I've ever been involved with. And I was involved with the internet. Now, let's talk about the good, the bad, the ugly. The imposable thumb turns out to be a really big deal. And this is about, let me give you the analogy. The internet was like my fingers, my 4 fingers. I can push things around with my 4 fingers real easy. But it's not real good at grabbing and holding on to things. And that's really important. But the opposable thumb allows me to actually grab a hold of something and actually manipulate it. And it makes me a tool user. It allows me to manipulate that. The blockchain is much more than a distributed ledger that distributes state across people that they can trust. It is the first framework we have of being able to own and control value that does not have to have an intermediary. And that is a really big deal. Now, cryptocurrencies, as the new model of using this, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, tokens of different kinds, were really one step forward and two steps back. So the one step forward was you could do this without an intermediary. That was a big deal. That was a big deal. The two steps back is that we went back to a single ledger. In a single ledger, the problem is that ownership and possession are the same thing. Now, about 400 years ago, 500 years ago, we figured out that was a really bad idea. And we created something called the double entry accounting system to be able to account for the separation of ownership and possession. Because before, the only way you knew how much you had is you walked into the treasury and you said, well, how much gold is in the treasury? You know, based on that pile of gold, I'm doing pretty good. Now, you could basically owe all that money to somebody else, but you wouldn't know about it. And so our entire financial framework is not based on ownership and possession being the same thing. In fact, all of our legal framework for value transfers, all of our institutions, the entire economic framework structure we have is based on ownership and possession being able to be separated. But we went backwards. The other thing we went backwards with is we lost a lot of the enhancements to prevent abuse of the financial system. The ability to use it for money laundering, the ability to use it for transferring things in ways that are not positive or healthy, the ability to manipulate markets and do a lot of other things that are involved. And ICOs and tokens really brought out the worst in markets. They didn't do anything we didn't already know what people would do if they have unfettered markets, but they really did bring out the worst in markets. And we need to admit that, because if we don't admit that, what happens is really bad things will occur. We either leave it the wild, wild west, and in the wild, wild west, the guy with the biggest gun wins. That's what happens in the wild, wild west. We get dystopia. You don't want dystopia. Or we put together some kind of legal framework. Now, for Sweetbridge, it was really important for us to use blockchain. A lot of people use blockchain because it's a fad. It's good. Oh, look at this. It's great. I can raise a lot of money. You know, there's a lot of reasons. But we had some really sound reasons for using it, and I thought we should discuss them for a second. One is we needed to tokenize value trapped in assets. We wanted to take the non-risky portion of value out of all sorts of different asset classes and create a new asset. And the blockchain allowed us to do this through tokenization. The second is we wanted to convert discounts into an asset. Now, people don't think of discounts as being something you could ever be an asset, but this is actually one of the most incredible financial tricks of all time, that you can do this. It's as fundamental a shift as the creation of a bond. And in fact, it's the inverse of a bond, because it gives you lower future costs for an expense today. And there's all sorts of places in reality where this occurs, but we can't tokenize it, and you can't actually implement this in a way that's transferable, fungible, and universal that works outside of, say, an airline or some other, Starbucks program or something. You can't actually do this unless you have a payment system that you can tap into and actually monitor for transactions. Well, the blockchain allows that. We wanted to be able to eliminate counterparty risk in trade. Counterparty risk is actually one of the most artificial and yet real. How could it be artificial and real? Well, it's artificial in that it's measured through artificial means. It's real in that it really occurs, and people get screwed if they basically order something and pay for it and then don't get the goods. This is a bad problem, okay? And so it's very open to abuse, but most of the risk isn't real. You can actually solve this problem with blockchain. And finally, we realized that you have to have a regulatory compliant environment, but in the commons and the decentralized, how do you do this? If you don't have a firm to basically report, if you can't do the eyeball thing to somebody, how do you know who the customer is? How do you make sure that the money that's being sent through the system isn't being used for nefarious purposes and that it didn't come from a nefarious source? So I want to focus on that. What we did is we went around the world and we started talking to regulators, financial ministries, lawyers, all sorts of people, anyone who would talk to us, frankly, about what would you want? Not what can we get away with, but in the ideal world, what do you want? And why do the things, the regulations you have, why do they exist? What problem are they trying to solve? And we found some really common problems. So anonymity is really not a very good thing in commerce. It's very highly prized in wealth accumulation. Nobody wants people to know how much money you have in the vault, but it's not highly prized in commerce. And in commerce, it's actually a really big problem, and it's at the heart of KYC and AML. And what we found is that of the countries we talked to, universally they did not like the idea of anonymity because they had had lots of experience with it over hundreds of years where it went wrong. And so that's something that should be listened to. The other thing is no recourse. The recourse is a result of possession and ownership being the same thing. No recourse is. In recourse, what this means is if there's a lawsuit or some kind of judgment or somebody doesn't fulfill their duty, can you go in and get the money back? Is there a way to use the legal system or to use some kind of dispute resolution process to get made whole when somebody defrauds you? The problem with the existing version of cryptocurrencies was that the attacks are all on the edge. All of the risks are now pushed to the consumer. And the simplest attack is the rubber hose. This is very bad. And if the consumer loses their private key, God forbid, they lose all their money. Who thinks this is a good idea? A bunch of crazy people, but that's not a good idea. There is no built-in compliance reporting. So there is no way to detect, monitor, report on bad actors. If we want to be honest, how many people have ever done a Bitcoin or Ethereum transaction? Okay, almost everybody in the room. Is it instantaneous? No. No, come on. So send it to an exchange, and how long will it be before they allow you to actually start using it? No, it's because there can be your block might get pruned. Okay? Your block might get pruned. How many people have actually set a transaction and then not had it actually get picked up because you didn't put enough money in? And CryptoKitties was kind of the all rage. Yeah. So, so look if you compare that with what exists in the payment systems that we have today, it stinks. It stinks. It can't handle even 100th of the processing volume of what happens just in this nation, let alone the entire volume of the kind of financial infrastructure. And then the public privacy debate. This is really an artificial problem, but everybody seems to want to talk about it, which is what we found is that regulators really didn't know how to think about this. We need certain things to be available to us, but we also recognize that, that could be bad because people could do things like stalk people or find out things that they shouldn't be able to find out if this stuff isn't protected somehow. And so it really needs to be private. But at the same time, we understand that there's this thing called accountability and transparency that's a good thing, and there's really kind of a debate about this. And so these were all the things that we found that were things people pointed out as defects in the original systems. And so we felt that the solution to this was to rethink the systems and ask the question, can we use the technology itself to basically rebuild the stuff? And the answer was yes. And so what we did is we said, can you build KYC AML in? And I'm going to show you how you can build KYC AML in to the tech at the protocol level in a way nobody can get around. Any regulator can verify. Any police force with the proper right can exercise. And these are the list of things that we found that were common for 17 of the G20 nations that we talked to. These were the common concerns they wanted. And it wasn't, again, the question wasn't, what do you have to let me do something? The question was, what would you like? What would make you comfortable with this? Now, CIP is Customer Identification Process. And what this means is, how do you identify and know that when the transaction is occurring, that the person is doing that transaction versus some other party doing it, at that time, okay? You need to do that, and that's very different than KYC, which is all about knowing, what customer it is, what their business is, where the money comes from, that they're not some actor that's acting on behalf of another party. And then payment information processes, which in the United States are things like CTR reporting. You have your own, and every nation, they have their own. This is the questionable transaction stuff, the things that you need to report that might be suspicious or that exceed some level of reporting. You can build this into the tech. So the tech will just do this. And you can use all sorts of very common, sophisticated tooling that exists now, such as AI and other things, to look for the stuff that might be AML. And you can do this without a person actually having to actually do it, and you can actually determine whether or not it happened, and you can actually make sure that when it needs to learn some new behavior or look for some new risk, that it gets applied, and you can also make sure that nobody can get around it. Now, recourse and indemnification, customer protection. Everybody was concerned about customer protection, and this has to do with how do you protect customers from being defrauded, how do you protect them from being somehow taken advantage of. And then trade and tax compliance. So in international transactions, can you enforce the compliance of the transaction at a transaction level? That would be the ideal thing. And on tax, can you charge the tax real time? So we worked on that. And what we found is that if you look at the problem at its kind of, think of it molecularly. There are 4 basic systems that have to work together and all be synchronized in order for you to do these things in RegTech. The first is the identity of people, entities, and assets. The second is both the legal framework in which this is happening, the legal jurisdiction, the laws that are covering it, what's the regulatory requirements, and the contracts, the legal contracts between the parties. The third is the accounting treatment. Is this a purchase? Is this a receivable for which you should have a payable? Is this a loan? What is it? And finally is the payment. In today's world, these are run by completely separate systems. And what we found is that most of the regulation had been created and most of the enforcement activity had been created because these are separate systems and people will manipulate them. That's why they're there, is people do manipulate them. In fact, almost all financial crime and almost all fraud come through one manipulation or errors in one of those areas. And the reason is to synchronize these things is an n squared minus n problem. For those in computer science, you'll know what that means. But it means that n is the number of parties squared is the number of by the number of reconciliations minus the number of parties is the number of things you have to reconcile with one another. In this example here, there are 12. But it's worse than that, because you have to be able to do this across all counterparties in a transaction. It's not just whether your belief is that this is all okay. The only way you can actually prevent abuse and fraud is if all of the parties take the exact same view. So they all agree, yes, we are operating in this legal jurisdiction on this transaction. They all agree that, yes, this is the actual contract that's involved. They all agree that, yes, these are the parties, this is the person who's doing this, they have the authority to do this, and these are the assets that we're actually doing this with. You have to get this all to occur and all agree. Well, the beauty is you can actually create technology now that will do this and enforce it at a level. Now, this had a side effect we didn't anticipate initially, and the side effect is that when you chain these together, it becomes almost impractical to conduct any kind of money laundering activity. And the reason is twofold. One, there is now entire traceability of a series of transactions to all the parties, all the accounting treatments, all the legal agreements, all the legal jurisdictions in which it happened, all the way back through a series of transactions that occur in that system. The second is it would cost so much money to basically try to use it to money launder that nobody would pick that. And the reason is you would have to actually set up all sorts of fake organizations, conduct real transactions, which are very frictionful. You would lose tons of money by doing that. and you would have to do a ton of work. In fact, each time you add another link to this chain, so the more and more and more of these links you have, the cost goes up logarithmically. That's right, the cost goes up logarithmically to lie. And so we saw in this the answer to a lot of problems. But there's one other side effect that we realized that you needed. If you do this all within a sealed system that uses a virtual currency, not a cryptocurrency that you can trade on an exchange, that means you can't lose anything, you can't steal anything, and you have entire recourse to unravel anything in the system. And all of the risk is on the boundary to the existing system at the exchange. So it's when you go out to fiat that you inject risk. Inside the container, you have very, very, very little risk. In fact, almost all the risk inside the container, I would argue, you can basically hedge. So the result was that a properly designed system could make it difficult to lie, cheat, and steal, and could be fully compliant. We believe that this structure is fully compliant. We would love to talk to you guys about that. And at the same time, preserve privacy, where governments have to have a right, based on their legal context, to get access to the information. And our recommendation is for governments that, look at, if you can build the regulatory tech in, that ought to be the thing that we look to do, because adding more enforcement layers, kind of using the old world structure, may not work for things that are in the commons. And the power of enabling the commons is too great. Now I want to turn my attention to ICOs. There are good things about ICOs. We actually ran an ICO, and let me tell you, it is very, very difficult to do an ethical ICO. It is very difficult to do KYC AML at a high level of KYC AML, and not lose money. We lost tens of millions of euros over what we could have raised because we said no. Tens of millions of euros. And that's because we actually did do rigorous KYC and rigorous AML. And then we lost almost another 10 million euros, even though we had done the KYC AML, even though we had worked with banks and exchanges in advance to approve our process, even though we were told we had the most rigorous process they had ever seen in the space. Universally, no one has ever told us that there was anyone that had a better process than ours. Even though all that was true, once we raised the money and we went to them to try to exchange it to fiat, it took 4 months. During that period of time, the market crashed. Now, we could have done what everyone else did. Do you know what people were telling us to do? Oh, hey, just go to Asia. You can go there, you can just basically convert everything to Bitcoin, take the Bitcoin, run it through an exchange to a liquidity provider. The liquidity provider will then take it back, run it through another exchange, and give it to you through an account that you basically just set up for yourselves, and basically you're a crypto trader. Go onto this exchange, sign up as a crypto trader, and you'll be able to get this money. That's a true story. That's money laundering. We said no. It cost us $9 million. So why do it? Well, there's some good things about it, okay? You can actually fund a commons. Now, VCs will not fund a commons. Corporations might, but VCs won't. You can create a better alignment of interests. You can actually get rid of the disinterest of the shareholder. The shareholder in an existing corporation is not interested in the same things as the customers or the employees are. And the shareholder is the one who the company or the firm is run for, not the employees, not the customers. I was a CEO of a venture capital-backed company. It was quite successful. International firm that I built, sold to the largest companies in the world. Eventually sold it to a PE firm and retired. While I was a CEO, I was repeatedly reminded that the decision I was making needs to be made to the benefit of the shareholders, not the customers, and definitely not the employees. That's a true story. It separates ownership from governance. This is an important thing. This is a really good thing because governance of companies, particularly startup companies, if they're VC funded, let me tell you the VCs have one and only one interest, which is maximizing their return on investment for their partnership and for the person who's on the board to get the biggest dang bonus they can possibly get. Let's just be honest, okay? That is the motive. And as long as you know that, that can be okay, but separating ownership from governance means that you can actually now create environments that have the behavior of a for-profit entity, but which are governed like a nonprofit organization, where the people who are there are governing it for the benefit of the commons, not governing it for the benefit of themselves. Decentralization of capital formation and the democratization of that are big deals. We need to do this. We can't just have the wealthiest people have access to doing this. And crowdfunding is a really good model to get a community to build a product or service that they want. Now the bad. The market is driven by hype. The ethics are amazingly questionable. Most crypto events I leave, I feel like I have to take a shower. It's highly controlled by large money players. It is not the retail guy. 80–90% of all the money that goes into these things comes from large funds, whales, and other things. Forget what everybody else says. It's all fake. It's not true. It's difficult. It's difficult to be successful and act ethically. I cannot tell you how many arguments that were had, how many battles that occurred because we had to say no. Nor how much our community crucified us for that. I know very few people that can stand up to the pressure of actually saying no to somebody who walks in and says, look, I've got a bag here of cash. I'd like to give it to you. I'd like to buy some of your tokens. I'll pay extra. I said no. Most projects are poor quality. It's going to be a high failure rate. And the token economics for the ones that aren't securities, and even for the ones that are securities, are almost all flawed. I'm being kind at saying 90% actually is the number. It's well above that. Now, the really ugly part of the space, when you do try to do something for the commons, you have to publish it. You have to put it out there. And everything we've done, we've published and put out there, been totally transparent, shared all the math, shared all the information. We can prove that we have 6 and growing copycats, people that literally copied our math. Because we knew that our math would be copied, we injected an error. There are 6 projects out there who raised combined multiple times what we raised, who did nothing but did it by copying our stuff. All of them are for profit. One of them is run by a really, really big company. Exchanges control the market. They're mostly into manipulation. Most of the trading volume isn't real. The liquidity is not really there. Mostly it's wash trading and market making. The market making is largely false. It's mostly run by people that are desperate to pump and dump. What's the floor of something that has no value? As soon as you put futures on it, I was at a very interesting presentation by CME Group, who runs the futures market for Bitcoin, where one of their analysts basically presented an unbelievably compelling argument that the current crash in the price of crypto occurred as a result of the futures market. And the reason is there is no bottom. With real commodities, there's a bottom. There's a place at which useful use of that commodity, like eating or building some product, cause somebody to go, man, I'm going to go buy a year's supply of that stuff because that's a good deal right now. and you go off and get a bunch of it. Not there. The retail buyer pays the most. The real truth is that funds in the space typically get an 70 to 80% discount. Most of that's hidden. It's hidden in things like advisory fees and other things. We've refused to do every single one of these, and as such, we decided not to take money from funds early on in the project. What the retail buyer pays is a lot more, and they use that to basically justify the exchange listing price and then make a bunch of money. And the value is fake. So there's actually something behind that slide. I don't know why it's not showing, but the good news is the free market kind of worked and the bubble burst. So we're now in this trough of disillusionment, and we're in crypto winter, and this is the perfect time to get the model right. Because we will come out of it. This is really something good. A lot of bad things have happened, but there's a lot of good things that can be done. And the lesson that we learned is you can do an ICO and do it responsibly and well. I'm sure we screwed up something. It's impossible in this space not to step on a landmine. Let me tell you. But we tried. But we need enlightened government. We need governmental help. Because what happens when the government isn't engaged is that when they just let it happen, and there's very little understanding of what's good, what's okay, what's not okay, is that primarily what you have is crazily courageous people or bad actors. And the courageous people are small. They're rare. They're few. The bad actors are many. And it creates the Wild West. So you can do one that's ethically and compliantly responsible, but it's really hard. And if you're going to do one, you're going to be tested. You're going to be tempted. So how could we do this better? So our recommendation, after our own experience, is that we need to go beyond sandboxes and beaches and other things that are being proposed. We're in favor of that stuff, but we need to go further than that. And we need to basically do something where I'm a big believer in incubation models. And the model that you have here through DutchChain is one of the better ones I know of. And using an ecosystem that brings together corporates, entrepreneurs, and governments together to actually have dialogue and work together and create some things that are okay to do. That this is something, if you do it this way, then we're okay with that. Gives people a path. It gives them a North Star to guide by. And we think that's a good idea. We also think that the Netherlands is in a unique position. I go all over the world and talk to people about this stuff. And the Netherlands has two good things. It's small enough that you can actually get the right people in a room to talk. It's large enough that it has economic scale, so you can do something that's meaningful. But it also has something else that's really unique that's probably only shared by a handful of countries on Earth. And that is this culture of collaboration. There is probably nowhere where I go that people as a culture understand kind of collaborating together in an economic way to actually make something good happen than this country. It's a unique heritage that you have. For a small country, you've had a disproportionate effect on global trade for centuries. And you did that because you came together. And we're looking at the creation of something new, the commons, replacing the firm. And I believe the Netherlands is well placed to potentially be, the people that kind of lead us out of some of that bad and ugly stuff that I referred to into something which is much more positive. I can tell you it will not come from the United States. The United States is too fractured, has too many different hands in the pie. Between the states and the federal government and all the different agencies involved, you can't get anybody in the room, and if you did, there's no way they would ever agree with one another, because as soon as you put them in the room, the cameras would show up and they'd have to basically take political positions. It's also the environment of, kind of free market and rugged individualism. And that's exactly the opposite of what's needed right now, what needs collaboration. I don't think it's going to happen in Asia. Asia is the wild, wild east right now. And it's an amazing place. If I was a young man, I'd want to be there for my career. But it's trying to out-compete the West. And so it's really into competition. And it's being successful largely because it's doing stuff new. But it thinks it's good. So not really big on collaboration, outside of maybe the Chinese, which do collaboration at a completely different scale, both timeline and otherwise. But it is kind of centrally planned. Anyway, thank you.
All right, Scott, thanks so much. Enough to talk about in the Q&A, I think, and that goes for both Scott and Ernestine. We have a break now, and I suggest we're back at 2:30, and start with the two other speakers, and then the decentralized Q&A. Right? See you in a bit. Zo, wat zeg je? Leuk verhaal. Wat hoor. Hallo. Sta ik nu aan? All right. Shall we begin? So we continue. Okay. So already plenty enough to talk about from the first part. I have to mention from Maria that we have a live stream going. So if you know some people that could not be here today, feel free to mention that we have a live stream up and running, and you can find it on the DutchChain Twitter. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Cassius Kiani, and yeah, he's working with Stefan Tual on numerous blockchain-based projects, and also discovering the international realm of regulatory environment, and also discovering that from a very interesting kind of projects. Perhaps some of you know Terra Zero. Anyone familiar with Terra Zero? Yeah. So it's basically a forest that owns itself. And that can govern itself. It has its own wallet, or it can even own more wallets. It can make decisions. It can hire people to chop some of the wood and sell it. But what happens when the forest decides to grow a cannabis field because that yield is better, right? So it's not a forest. Yeah. Well, so what if a river owns itself, which is the case in New Zealand? In some other countries on the globe, nature has its own rights. So when we design complex systems, when, for instance, you want to have a look at the Nature 2.0 track sponsored by Inexus, then you go into that realm. And how do we keep that governable, and how do we prevent bad things from happening? So it's very cool that Cassius wanted to join us from London, where you're based, and share with us his learning so far in the international realm of regulators and regulations and projects you're doing. Ladies and gentlemen, Cassius Kiani.
Can everyone hear me? Perfect, wonderful. So first of all, it's incredible to see so many people gathered in such a small space, purely to be interested in blockchain. I mean, this wouldn't have happened 5-6 years ago. This is incredible. So that's the first thing I want to start with. I'd also like to open up with a joke, which might be kind of timely here. I might be the only one that finds this funny. But why is Bitcoin's difficulty so high? Oh, you know it. You know it. Too much hash. Way good. I'm glad I got a laugh from that. Fantastic. Cool. I thought that would be relevant. Cool. So, well, what I'm here to talk to you today about my two favorite things, which are DIADANs and blockchain. And unfortunately, one of my least favorite things, which is regulation. But regulation isn't really the root of all evil by any stretch. I mean, let's be real, there's regulation on the blockchain in the form of consensus algorithms. Ultimately, regulation is great at keeping people safe, right? It's great at keeping industry safe. It exists for a reason. But there is a big problem with regulation in general. And that comes back to the analogy of it's too big a brush. So the idea that, essentially, if you're X, then you must Y, or you must be Y. And this is the problem with regulation, is that regulation wants to force you to be something you're not. And if that doesn't work with you, to be something that you aren't in order to get what you want. And that fundamentally becomes quite a big problem in the real world, because as we've seen with labels and stereotypes, they tend to often come with detrimental consequences, as we've seen over time. And there's a few instances which we can't talk about, but I'm sure we can all think about and relate to. Now, when it comes to blockchain technology, I'm going to give you a really bastardized definition of blockchain technology, but it's one which is, at its core, probably the most simple. And that is that, essentially, all blockchain technology is is a means to exchange value without trust. It really isn't too much more. Of course, we can turn around and go through technical details, and yes, you can all turn around and say, oh, Cassius, you haven't considered all of these things, but really, on a really macro level, that's what it is. And when we look at cryptocurrency, well, cryptocurrency really is just incentivization for these blockchain networks, and ultimately, more than anything else, it's a store of value in some cases and a key to open doors in others. But regulators tend to focus really heavily on cryptocurrency more so than blockchain technology. And the issue with this is that, let's first of all realize that blockchain technology is not new money, it's new technology. But the problem is that if regulation doesn't begin to see that and change, then perhaps one day blockchain technology will become new money, because as we've been met with over time is when you put an immovable object in front of humanity, over time we learn to tunnel underneath it. And we play a really dangerous game when we put the world's smartest minds in a room and we say, hey, this technology can change the world, but no one wants you to change the world. What do? And you begin to create that tunnel. And ultimately, Web3 is creating a global shift. So it's another shift of kind of power, wealth, and ultimately a new opportunity for agile jurisdictions and jurisdictions in general to begin to shape this technology, this kind of exciting world that we live in, which means that there's a lot to gain, and there are some malicious actors in place, and some jurisdictions who want to capitalize on this purely fiscally, and others who want it to do good. But now is the opportunity to turn around and to do something about this, whether it's relevant to your interests or not. And the great thing about being at the forefront of an industry that's as infinite as blockchain is you get a lot of choice in how you can help shape this. And I'm a big believer that revolution is difficult, but evolution is not so difficult. So there's a way where we can all move forward together and we can all win, and then we can turn around and define essentially incrementally what this future looks like. Now, why am I well placed to talk about essentially regulation and agile jurisdictions? Well, essentially we're pioneering a project called the Deodance Project, which is well, we intend to map natural resources to the blockchain. And so what that looks like is we attempt to create rational economic actors through natural resources and natural systems to allow them to essentially work towards their own goals without incumbent organizations or middlemen or third parties turning around and interfering with that. So the analogy here is it's not so much save the whales as it's give the whales the tools to save themselves, as complex as that may be. So as you can see by the wonderful whales, which are either dancing behind me or trapped between ice, they could do something to... Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm British, so this is a common habit. Let me... Oh, my goodness. Of course. I'll slow it down a bit. So, essentially, that's what the Deodance Project is. It's a way to create rational economic actors through these natural systems. So essentially, in the case of a forest may look to optimize its stock, which could be its canopy, ultimately the area that the forest occupies. And that allows it to say that it's progressing and doing well. And in some cases, with existing natural resources, they can turn around and minimize externalities for governments, or that can turn around and ultimately, like in the case of new natural resources created, distribute some value to investors. There's a number of ways it could work. But again, the idea comes back to an opportunity to seize the day more than anything else, and how we can take regulation and we can learn from agile jurisdictions and use that to move forwards. Now, the Netherlands in general, as has been mentioned before by Scott Nelson, is an incredibly agile jurisdiction. You guys do a lot of things well already, but being from the UK and having a problem with how fast I speak, I can give you an example of a lot of things with a lot of jurisdictions under kind of UK governance which don't move in a useful way, and there's quite a few other jurisdictions which we've spoken to which end up doing the same thing. So when we speak to people about this, the common question is, for what reason would we support a business or technology which may replace our standing in the world, that may change our order, our control of things? Well, and the reality is, it comes back to this tunneling analogy, because the idea is that while the technology is infant and you're able to turn around and help craft it or help move the system forward in a way which is beneficial for everyone, because that's realistically what blockchain technology is. It's closed ecosystems which benefit people who care for said closed ecosystems, and then they integrate, and the world becomes more connected for commonization. We get the ability to turn around and to help shape this together, rather than have me or someone else define what the future looks like, purely because everyone is unwilling to move or cooperate. And regulation ends up coming back to this analogy of too big a brush. Everything works in abstracts, and I'm a designer, so I love art, and this is fantastic. This is not useful when we're attempting to move forward and create something where there is a lot of risk. And fundamentally, it's the good and bad actors are tarred with these large brushes, and in some situations, they can be supported and they can be malicious. And in other cases, good actors can be heavily penalized in a way which isn't useful or good for anyone. So I'm going to go through essentially a few common problems that we've encountered, and then I'll touch on some solutions, which may seem obvious once we've gone through some of the problems. And some of the problems might seem quite rudimentary, but they're problems that are common and everyone faces. And the first one, really, is this question, and I get this all the time, and this is, do you know a bank which is crypto-friendly? And that's really interesting, because it's not a bank which is blockchain-friendly, it's a bank which is crypto-friendly, and the entire ecosystem in some way will take transactions across cryptocurrency. Now, if it's a store of value like Bitcoin, obviously Ethereum, it doesn't really matter too much, but I get this question probably more times than I can count on a weekly basis. And the reality is, I don't usually have an answer other than, well, where are you based, or where do you intend to be based? And then the question comes back to, again, which jurisdictions allow cryptocurrency and fiat to be, interchangeable, or more than that, people to declare that they are taking both. Because in the UK, it's an incredibly risky game to turn around to any bank and say, oh, well, actually, I am looking to take cryptocurrency as well as fiat. There's been a number of occasions where essentially bank accounts have been shut down for transactions with Coinbase, Kraken, all sorts of things, like not nominal things, let alone having invoices paid or ultimately turning around and running an ICO. And this is where people tend to look for agile jurisdictions, purely because of banking, if nothing else. Regulation around banking, especially in the UK, is pretty strict, and it's difficult, and ultimately it's something that comes up time and time again. And then this is the second problem with blockchain, is that blockchain is finance. There is, in the eyes of most regulators, it is nothing else. And this is incredibly difficult, especially when you hear the words DLT over and over again. Yes, one aspect of blockchain technology is a distributed ledger in some instances, or most. But the real issue with that is that you overlook all of the other promising aspects of this technology and how it can be used, especially when it comes to the idea of exchanging value. And ultimately, value does not have to be exchanged in the same way that everything has to be exchanged with fiat and services. I mean, we can have a conversation right now. We can talk about all of the exciting things going on in the blockchain space. You could give me pointers, I could give you pointers. That's an exchange of value. There's no fiat involved. So to turn around and say that blockchain is finance becomes quite difficult, especially given the way that it allows value to be exchanged. But more than that, blockchain technology allows us to change the way that the social mesh that we all exist upon, technology like the Diadance project, wouldn't be possible today without blockchain technology. And while there are clever people like Willy Schmidt who've proven these things in the real world, the premise is that the blockchain technology is simply a way of aggregating all of these clever kind of aspects of tokenomics, incentivization, everything else. It's not merely DLT, and to get hung up and focused on that starts to create fundamental problems in the space. And problem 3 is nominal understanding. So Bitcoin really is only 10 years old, which means that to be an expert in the field, you either have to have created a large-scale blockchain business, or you have to be an incredibly smart professor that spent a lot of time with this. I mean, most of us aren't experts. I myself wouldn't call myself an expert as much as I am a spectator, an experimenter. And then when we go to jurisdictions, or more than that, people in the regulatory space who want to talk about this technology, they don't have anyone who would be defined as an expert, or even to an extent an experimenter, which makes it incredibly difficult to, one, speak the language, which, yes, I do agree is almost a problem which we all in the blockchain space need to fix. We all need to get better at talking to people about what this technology is, how it works, and how to make it less scary. We do a terrible job of that, especially when we start saying words like smart contracts and Genesis blocks, and then my mother looks at me like I'm insane. But this is a really common problem. And so jurisdictions need to have some level of expertise within there. Now, whether that's internal, external, or however they plan to put it in, the agile jurisdictions, while they don't have this, what they are incredibly good at is they're incredibly good at listening and fundamentally understanding that, yes, they don't quite get this technology, but perhaps there is a way we can speak each other's language. And a lack of process at the moment is absolutely chaos in the regulation space. So if you're a blockchain business looking to talk to regulators and ultimately explore the opportunities of what the technology can do, not only for the jurisdiction, but for themselves, and obviously working together, there's no way that you can talk to these people unless fundamentally what you do is you know the right people, and you go and have a glass of wine with them, which is, don't get me wrong, that's how the world tends to work right now, but it shouldn't be working that way in the blockchain space, not at all. Especially when that punishes innovation quite heavily, because we have to remember, a lot of the world's smartest people don't quite care for spending time with bigwigs in a wine bar or whiskey bar drinking wine and bad whiskey. What they care about is they care about coding and they care about moving things forward and being innovative. And so some of the best ideas that exist within the blockchain space will never make it through or forwards unless you get business people on board. And the issue is that business people, notoriously, are self-interested parties for fiscal reasons, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, everyone deserves to win in their own way. But the question becomes, how far can we move forwards if we can't find a middle ground or an aggregate around this? And so a lack of processes creates huge amounts of problems in this space, purely because it doesn't give a voice for these people to talk. And more than that, we exist now in a way where things like ICOs, KYC, AML, these are all things which have been around for an incredibly long time. There's still no standardized processes around this, especially across jurisdictions or within jurisdictions. Everyone ums and ahs, and to get a straight answer can usually take far longer than you'd like. And that's not necessarily a good thing when we start to look at our next point, because ultimately the biggest problem that we face right now is the whole watch and wait approach. And the watch and wait approach, more than anything, completely goes against the do no harm analogy of the dot-com boom. And the reason it goes against the do no harm analogy is because when nothing is done to support or allow these businesses a voice or a way to move forwards, you only get two actors that tend to move. And the actors that tend to move are the actors which are willing to take substantial risk and put everything on the line, or the people who turn around and say, well, actually, I can't afford to move. And so they end up in a situation where the most innovative people can't do anything because they're paralyzed by the fear of incarceration, ultimately getting themselves into trouble that they can't get out of. And that's horrifically detrimental when you turn around and say, well, this technology needs to move forward, and it needs to move forward in a way which is beneficial to everyone, apart from 80% of the industry isn't willing to be incarcerated. And there's plenty of examples with this. And you know, my co-founder was involved with the DAO, which I'm sure a lot of you know, was a really interesting case study around kind of, you know, smart bugs in smart contracts and ultimately recursive errors. Now, the interesting thing with the DAO was the SEC knew the DAO was happening. They knew this was going on. It was impossible to ignore that at the time the largest crowdfunding project in history wasn't on their radar in some way or another. And if they say otherwise, then I worry what the SEC is doing on a daily basis. But let's be real, they knew about it. And they were allowing the DAO to continue and move forward despite knowing full well that because of the wording that was used, or perhaps because of the use case of the tokens within the system, that if the DAO was to move forward, everyone who was a part of the DAO would be incarcerated. I mean, this is a public report. You can go take a look at it. They would have got more than a slap on the wrist, and God knows what else in prison. But it would have been bad for them. We'll put it that way. Now, the issue is with the regulators here is that the watch and wait approach was terrible because they could have turned around, they could have talked to these people, they could have issued some level of statement at any point in time. And the DAO was not by any means the first project to turn around and say, well, actually, we're doing something which could be borderline grey in your eyes. Who can we talk to? Who can we get in front of? I mean, Ethereum was the same thing, and Ethereum was recently described as, well, it was a security, but now it's not. Oh, well, that's all well and good. Thank you for telling us, 2 years too late. There would have been a lot more, would have got a lot more sleep had I known that beforehand, etc. So it's interesting to see that the watch and wait approach is probably the most detrimental because no one chooses to act. And if no one chooses to act, everyone just becomes paralyzed. And in the case of these large-scale innovation projects, were they willing to take the risk to fail? Yeah, it's easy to do so if you're horrifically passionate about the technology and perhaps you're a 20-year-old Canadian boy with not a lot to lose, right? But this is not the case for the majority of people, especially the people who are looking to get into space or looking to move into the space and they have, families to depend on everything else. Let's remember that blockchain technology works on the premises of game theory and behavioral economics. So to understand how these people move is simple. You understand what they have to lose more than anything else. But then that comes back to this idea of building together, right? And unfortunately, I couldn't find a picture of people painting together, which kind of makes my too big a brush analogy a little bit weaker now. But there's a house, and you paint houses in the end, so we're still there. But this is it. Well, I haven't touched on all of the regulation problems in the space. I've touched on a few key ones that I've encountered. And, brought up time and time again with the people that we work with and ultimately support in the industry. And the idea is that in order to move forwards, what would help everyone to move forwards is to turn around and to look at this as we are building a future together. There is no segregation between regulators and people in the blockchain space as much as it is we are a race of humans and we interact with the world in the same way. And despite whatever wealth we may or may not have, intrinsically we are the same people because we need to eat, we need to sleep, we sometimes use Facebook and watch too many cat videos, and that's normal, right? So this is the same way that we have to look at blockchain technology and look at it as an enabler for the next future. And so a few of the solutions which I'm talking about may seem like common sense, and they're likely to be things that you guys in the Netherlands may or may not already be doing, because it wouldn't surprise me given how upfront and smart you guys are. So the first solution is to create objective advisory boards. And what do I mean by an objective advisory board? Well, it could be some of the examples which were given by Scott Nelson around kind of incubators or kind of environments to move forwards and to kind of like pioneer this technology. But in general, the key word here is objective advisory boards. So people from a range of backgrounds that are diverse, that have an understanding of this technology from a number of different perspectives. People who work within Ethereum have a different goal perhaps to Neo and everything else. So you have to get the right actors in play and to see what they're doing, and ultimately to bring together a board of regulators which can help do so as well is important. At the moment, there's by no means would I call the advisory boards I've seen objective. I mean, in fact, just simply because you put a bunch of white people around the boardroom table and turn around and say, well, combined they have 200 years of finance experience, does not sound like objective to me, especially when we're in a world where the technology is so goddamn complex that there's innovation, like that's been mentioned, every 90 to 120 days, simply because bugs exist, errors exist, things need to be changed. So objective advisory boards are arguably the first way to move forward, purely because not only will you get to hear what other people are saying, but more than that, conversations will happen where people listen. And ultimately, innovation is not groupthink. Innovation is diversity. And we've seen it time and time again in the business world, let alone the social good or the world, for the human world, as we call it. So solution 2 is to create a platform for conversations. And so we've touched on this already. But at the moment, there is no simple way to talk to most jurisdictions about this technology. And given how beneficial this is, and given how blockchain technology can pull at this social mesh, this social fabric that we all exist upon, by not having a platform for these conversations, people are missing out. And you're missing out purely because it's like, where the hell do people go? How do people speak? You have to ask your friends, family members, perhaps other people in the space. Like, it's all well and good for people, perhaps, who have contacts at the forefront of this industry, or people who are the founding fathers. That's not an issue. I mean, for me, this is much less of a problem, but it's a horrific problem for a lot of clever people looking to get into the space that perhaps do not know people who have those contacts and can make those introductions. And so there is no platform for these people to talk. There is no platform for these people to interact. And there's no platform for regulators to ultimately turn around and to say, I have these problems, which is why blockchain technology cannot move forward in the way that you suggest. Right? There's a lot of eye-opening conversations that can happen on both sides here, and this is the premise here. It's a conversation. It's two ways. Both parties need to listen. And I'm again firm believer in incremental evolution of this is what will move us forwards. And so having a platform for conversations is the same reason that successful relationships happen, purely because people are willing to listen. If you didn't listen to your other half, your partner, then that would be a really detrimental situation to be in, especially for the best part of 10, 20 years. And this is where blockchain technology is going. It's not going away. So we need to create this partnership, this relationship where there is these conversations that are happening, and there are these conversations where there is diversity and there are these people who are willing to listen to each other. And yes, I mean, another thing to mention here is that there are safe ways to fail. Again, there are things like the FCA sandbox. You can have a conversation with certain jurisdictions that have said, well, actually, look, we're willing to turn around and talk to you about this. But again, it focuses on the idea of new money, and especially in the UK at least. So blockchain technology is looked at as new money, and if you're not doing something within the fiscal space, at least with blockchain, then you run into a lot of detrimental issues with moving anything forwards or pioneering anything. It becomes incredibly tricky and difficult, purely because it's like, sorry, not finance, we can't create a safe way for you to fail. So if you're going to fail, like, oh, it's like, well, that's all well and good. Thank you for encouraging me to change the world, you bleep. Right, so and the last one, and again, I've hammered this home a few times, is really realize that blockchain technology is by no means new money, or at least not yet, right? We do come back to the analogy of humans are self-interested parties at heart to an extent. Commons, we've proven time and time again for tribes, and ultimately the way that we've grown as a society, that we do work towards social good. The idea is that if I give you an asset, I don't mind doing so, because there's a good chance to be returned to me in some way, in some way in the future, one way or another. That's how, you know, the fundamental economics began to work, with the whole value creation and value capture. So we have to look at this and realize that blockchain technology right now isn't new money, but if regulators are adamant in classifying it as that, then it will become that, because it'll be the only way that we can move forward. And the people who are passionate enough about the space will find a way forward. And there will be people who turn around and ultimately take malicious actions or capitalize in a malicious way to get this to where it needs to be. And that would be the really saddest thing here, is that as a proof of concept, Bitcoin was incredibly good at turning around and saying that we as humans can be incentivized in closed ecosystems towards common goals. And we can do that without any third-party monitoring or managing this, right? And so the saddest part about this will be that if we cannot turn around and look at this as a new technology and look at a new way to leverage this and move forward in a society that's pure to what Bitcoin originally pioneered and ultimately the blockchain is attempting to pioneer, then what we end up with is history rhyming again. And again, it just comes back to this global shift of power and wealth. We have an opportunity of blockchain technology to create these commons, to commonize things, to turn around and to make the world a fairer, better place, or at least a more trustworthy, honest place where people can interact, build, and change. I mean, we've seen that technology is slowly enabling this with the rise of freelancers and entrepreneurs. You know, nowadays it's easier to be an entrepreneur than it ever has been, which is a fantastic thing to think of. And in the future, perhaps one day with blockchain technology, it will become even easier. Maybe we'll all live in a world where we work towards what we believe is real through a series of microtransactions. God knows, right? Anything could happen here. But the premise is that unless we enable it to happen, nothing will change. Nothing will change at all. And history will rhyme, and we'll end up with Web3 being the next .com boom, and all that will happen is we'll end up with another 5 Amazons. Everyone will turn around and be like, oh, this isn't fair. What could we have done? It's like, haha, we were talking about this for years before this happened, but no one listened. Absolutely no one listened. No one decided that now was a good time to act. Instead, everyone said, well, you know, we're kind of happy with the way things are, but don't worry, like the British people, we'll complain when it's raining, sunny, or anything in between, purely because this is what we do, and that's life. And we can avoid that. We can literally avoid that right now. And so, purely because of the fact that I speak at 950 words per minute, I have finished 5 minutes early, which is a really good thing. And I can't even begin to tell you how painful it is for me to talk at this pace, because I have so much energy that it feels like my stomach is going to explode. So I do hope you've enjoyed this so far. Now, I put my email on here purely because I enjoy speaking to people. So if you have any questions, or you want to shout at me, or you want to ask how I learned to speak so quickly, by all means, please send me an email, and I'll be more than happy to chat and open up a discussion. But this is the thing. This is what blockchain technology is about. It's about enabling these discussions which can change the social fabric that we exist upon. And if you're truly passionate about the technology and how it can be used, then all you need to do is fundamentally have a conversation with someone. And that's what I realized from years of being in this space. There is no harm in these conversations. There is no harm in turning around and connecting with people, because this is how these things work, and this is how we move forwards, ultimately through a consensus. And obviously, I'd be really excited to speak to any one of you in the deep dive later. If you'd love to be confused and attempt to keep up with what I'm saying, then you're in the right place. Please come see me if you want a brain workout, or you want to exhaust all your brain sugar, as I call it, for the day. But yeah, I would welcome any conversations around DADANs in general, blockchain technology, and ultimately, how annoying Keynote is, because it didn't embed my font, and so now everything's in Helvetica Neue, which is a bit sad. But there you go. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Cassius. The verbal refreshment.
Can you try to speak?
Test.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks. Yeah. Right. So we continue.
Yep.
Your mic is working.
Test. Yes,
Yeah.
it's working.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm hand of applause for Martijn Wismeijer. Martijn, we're going to have just a casual conversation, but I think you're pioneering a very, very cool place because you're one of the very few actual cryptocurrency businesses in the Netherlands, but also in Czechia, rolling out a vast network of Bitcoin ATMs. So can you tell me a bit about how that started for you, the whole business?
I used to work at the bank. I was like doing home security for home banking systems. So eventually when I discovered Bitcoin, I met here in Amsterdam, I met our founder, Karol Kijowski. He was from the Czech Republic. So that's 5 years and 6 weeks ago. We thought the blockchain technology is going to like change the world, but how are we going to make people join the network? I had big problems getting my first Bitcoins because there weren't many ways to actually join the crypto community. There's no way to exchange. I believe there were no Dutch exchanges at the time, so we've always been makers. So this is why we thought, maybe make a machine that will allow me to purchase some crypto and later sell crypto, and first Bitcoin, then all the other coins. So gradually we've grown out to be the second largest manufacturer worldwide in this space. So there's like many competitors, but we're the fastest growing. So I think partly because we support many different cryptocurrencies, and now since last week, Ethereum tokens. So if you're doing anything with tokens or you're doing ICO project, dirty word as I've learned just now, but then our machines are well, I think because we have the best feature set at the best price. It's easy to actually be market leader then.
You have your own factory.
Correct. The company is based in Czech Republic. We have another company, a limited liability company in Florida, Bradenton. Most of our clients are in the US. So for this reason, we want to be like close to our clients and not just support, but also warehouse and everything. We manufacture everything in Czech Republic. I heard earlier today that there's like lots of opportunity in the Netherlands. Unfortunately, this is not how we experience it. There's many people wanting to manage, many people, we create apps, but we don't produce anything. We don't have any factories. In the Czech Republic, everybody's born a maker, I sometimes joke. So we were able to manufacture just outside of Prague. We fold the steel, we paint it, we design the motherboards. In Prague, we do our R&D, coding with a small group with 28 people, but we just sold over 2,040 now. I'm still counting the machines, 2,040 machines, of which 1,000 were sold in the last year. So you can see the exponential growth is really there.
And what are the main reasons for your clients to buy these machines? What do they want to achieve with it? Of course, they want to enable other people to get crypto or exchange it. But why do they want to do it?
I think our client base is gradually shifting. At first, we saw many mom and pop companies like a hotel, and the son was into that gamer currency called Bitcoin, and they wanted an ATM, so they bought one machine and placed it in their lobby. Over the past year, we've seen that most of our larger clients, they have many machines. They already operate a network of regular ATMs in the US. What they're doing now is they're adding cryptocurrency ATMs next to the existing ATMs. The reason why they're purchasing from a cryptocurrency ATM is because the requirements, AML, KYC requirements, are totally different than existing ATMs. I said, like on an existing ATM, you need what? PIN code, there's maybe a camera, and you need a card. On a crypto ATM, we've got biometrics, there's like AML, KYC, scanning, selfie scans. There's identity card scanning. There's lots of extra electronics required in those machines to be able to, comply with existing laws and regulations. So for most of our clients, they see it as a business opportunity that they add something to their existing offering, usually regular ATMs, that now they can add crypto, which is going to be the next frontier. So they don't want to miss out. So they add crypto, and their business model is adding a fee on it. So they do make a fee on every transaction.
So, but here you have all these things installed on your machines. It seems like quite a task to use it. How does that work?
Well,
I mean, what do I, as a user, have to prove basically before I can?
That depends. We switch all the features are there in the machines, and we produce them in Czech Republic, and we ship them everywhere worldwide. But in many countries there is no regulation regarding crypto. But there is always existing regulation regarding cash money. The cash money is heavily regulated everywhere in the world. So depending on local laws and regulations, we help them to switch on or off the correct features. So for example, sorry, I forgot your question.
So as a user, I mean, you have all these checks. So you have biometrics, you have the selfie scan, you have all these kinds of things. What do I actually have to use of all that range of features to get to use the machine? Is it very complicated for users, or is it very light?
It's the end user. It's just following the instructions on screen. Data, AML KYC data is stored at the operator. It's in a log file, so they can't just like change it themselves. So it's also to protect them from bad actors within the company. Depending on the regulations, they're either required to provide a phone number for a one-time PIN. In the US, by having the phone number, we are able to see whether that phone is actually registered to that person. So if then they show their identity card, then the operator can see, hey, the identity card is the same as the identity that pays for the phone bill. Or is it a burner phone? That might already be trigger high risk. While making a transaction, the machines can take pictures, so the operator can check, is that the same person using the ATM as the person that registered for the ATM services. Personally, I believe we should at least have some financial freedom. Unfortunately, we're the most visible part of the cryptocurrency ecosphere. If we don't comply, we'll be the first ones to get slapped and be closed up shop. So for this reason, I always tell our clients, don't try to be the best boy in class, just comply with local laws and regulations. We provide the tools to do so. I've been reading into this IMLD5, and one of the things is that we will have to link identities of our end users to the cryptocurrency addresses that they purchase their crypto on. Of course, this is great from a regulatory viewpoint, but makes no sense in the case of Dash, Monero, and all the other privacy coins. Yeah. What we'll see is that many more privacy layers will be added to cryptocurrency in response to regulation. This is probably what will happen. On the other hand, it's something we've already been doing for years because of regulations in the US. So I don't see any problem complying to a new regulation, especially AMLD5. I do think that we shouldn't try to over-regulate this. I think about according to chain analysis, doing blockchain analysis, they analyzed the blockchain transactions, and they found that roughly 5% of all transactions in crypto are potentially suspect. Doesn't directly mean there's something really wrong, but there's potentially something wrong. Compared to cash money, that's around what I understood, about 10%. I think we've done a good job in cleaning up our act, especially compared to the years when most crypto was used to buy stuff on the dark markets, like the Silk Road. I think we've come a long way. We will keep providing those tools required to check. I do, however, think that over-regulation will probably.
So in the past, let's say 3 years. I mean, you already mentioned that the Netherlands wasn't your prime spot. Was that because you couldn't get a bank account, for example?
That's a thing in itself. A bank account is a different problem altogether. In a way, we do want more transparency. Also, when we get new clients, we try to figure out what's their background. In the US, it's easy. We can check whether they got a history of financial crimes. If that's the case, we're not selling them any machines.
Yeah, so for everybody to understand, a client is somebody that purchases a machine, not the actual
correct,
user.
those are our clients. Now I lost your question.
So we were talking about getting a bank account.
But we find that's extremely hard for most of our clients, the ATM operators. What we see is like the banks can just say, oh, I think you're too high risk, and we're closing your account. So even though we want more transparency, and also from the ATM operator side, they want more transparency, it is still not transparent because there's lots of cash money moving around. It would be far more transparent if they would be allowed to open a bank account and deposit it, because it's also for auditing purposes. It's easy, They can see in the log files how much money has been turned over in revenue, and how much is deposited. So I think we have to make sure that at least the ATM operators are able to just deposit the cash into their accounts. And what we see right now is that banks use any SIRA or whatever the excuse to say, oh, no, you're too high risk. So basically driving them away. And one thing with money is money usually goes where it's well treated. So some of our operators just move the whole operation abroad and run their ATMs from elsewhere. I think this is a missed opportunity. It's also one of the reasons our company is in the Czech Republic and not in a place like the Netherlands, because...
You get a bank account there.
I'm banking with, I'm not allowed to say it, Bunk, because it's one of the few banks that actually wants me as a client. But, but for the rest, in the bank account in the Czech Republic, we have fewer problems. What we do see in the Czech Republic is that the smaller banks are put under pressure from their correspondent banks in the US. So even though the bank itself might be open to cryptocurrency or crypto businesses, their correspondence banks that will, from the US, that will just use their force to say, if you don't stop your crypto clients, then we'll cancel your correspondence account. And because there's a lot of business going on through the US or in US dollars, usually the banks will say, okay, find somebody else.
So where do you see that going? I mean, is there some way to break through? I mean, what would why would a bank, or why should a bank provide an account, considering all the risks? It's also maybe lack of knowledge about what could happen, but considering all these risks that where they could lose their license or get a hefty penalty, or...
We've seen banks here in the Netherlands require one of our ATM operators to hand over all their customer details.
Of course.
So that's everything. So I think there is I think they will know that we use AML KYC. But it's just an excuse to push them out because they're potentially competition. But until our operators are allowed to have a bank account without too much problems, I think transparency will not be there. And any regulation we create will not really be effective. I think the regulations are good. The problem, most of it we comply already or exceed. We even currently working on ways that we can enhance AML KYC at the ATMs by scanning the identity of the person using it, but not just taking a photographic picture, but by scanning the chip, so that that every European ID has got a chip, so that we either scan it via NFC, which we already have, or via chip reader, and that way we'll be able to identify every user of the ATM. And there is no point in even faking, a photoshopped ID won't work because you won't be able to fake the chip inside the ID. But it's all a bit fruitless if we don't if we don't allow our operators to open a bank account. I mean, that's the most transparent thing. Is that way we can check how much money is going through those companies. I mean, it's $40 to $60 million every month going through the ATMs worldwide, and I think it's a small amount for a financial institution, but I think it's a huge step for crypto.
From a retail point of view, it's quite a lot. So you're scanning my passport. How is my privacy protected, Martijn?
Well, anonymity versus privacy. I mean, you know, regulators will regulate. So
yeah, okay. But is there a way
for example, for smaller amounts, I believe AMLD5 allows for up to 150. And correct me if I'm wrong, $150 or euros before AML KYC has to take place. So there would be a very small amount would be allowed as an anonymous transaction. There's a limit to the amount of anonymous transactions. So if people try to do a smurfing attack, meaning breaking a large amount up into smaller bits, then the machine would lock down by itself. Above that, they'll just have to, they have to provide identity. I think this is, in a way, even though I personally believe that, financial freedom is one of our core freedoms. If you don't have any financial freedom, you're not really free. We're rapidly moving towards a society where there is no financial freedom because everything is paid with a card or like contactless payment. So this cash money is gradually going away out of our society. So I think cryptocurrency gives us an option here. I don't know. I don't have the right answer. It's just that we comply with whatever regulation there is, but
it takes also away some of the freedoms.
Definitely, yes.
Yeah, okay. So that's the balance we're exploring, of course. While also you are building it and working with your clients. When we prepared for this, you also told me that you were pretty picky on your clients, right? I mean, yeah, you can imagine that it's pretty easy to take your profit from a casino into your ATM.
Exactly. Well, as I said, if we find out that a client has a history of financial crime, in Europe we can't check that because privacy regulations. So again, there's this friction. We can't check that, and some of our clients who are starting out as a very good client, they turn, they move over to the dark side. I think partly pushed by not being able to open a bank account. At the same time, in the US, we can check and we can see, we can check if clients have a history of financial crimes. If that's the case, well, it would be foolish to sell them an ATM. Mm-hmm. We want to really change the world for the better. We don't think we can change the world if we would place our machines primarily in casinos. So for this reason, we don't really like any locations in casinos. At first, that's we never sold to like gambling. We could have probably had triple market share if we would have sold to casinos, but we're very strict about that. We really want to make a better place, the world a better place, and gambling usually doesn't really create a better world.
So do you foresee compliance fully automated at the protocol level when you use your machines? Is that something you foresee happening? And with that question also, how could the collaboration between regulators and operators and your company would look like?
That's a good question, Rutger. What I've seen on the earlier presentations, one of the earlier presentations, that even though we have the AMLD5, which is a European framework, then there is a local, national implementation, and local reporting of suspicious transactions has to be done on a national level, which for us makes it a little bit more complicated because we would rather see that it's like a European-wide standard which we can use to make reports about any transactions. We've recently opened up the source code, so it allows for the creation of plugins. So whenever there's a transaction done on an ATM, we can do automatic reporting to not just your accountant, but to any regulatory body that needs to and you need to know about the transactions. So this, we're gradually, opening our source code to make this possible. I think by 2020 we'll be fully operational and everything. Usually it doesn't take so long. It's just a matter of a few months hard work, and then we'll probably have everything ready. It's just for us, it would have been better if we would have seen some like European standard on which this reporting would have to be done. Because now we'll see, well, every European member state will have their own ways of implementing that. So yeah, it just creates a lot of work for us.
So if you look at the political landscape, when we look at cryptocurrency, a lot of voices are talking about more the bad and the ugly side of crypto. You're working each day to work on the good side of that. What should really change when you look at the last, let's say, year or 2 years? What should really change in the debate? Because you have been working with the clients, with the users. You've seen Bitcoin for years already growing and growing. What should fundamentally change in the way we talk about this?
I think a lot of times we still see that cryptocurrencies are like deemed like dark market currency. While, as you know from the blockchain of the hackathon, that's not the case. It's just a technology, and a technology that will change the world for the better. From a regulatory viewpoint, I think we have to realize this. Don't try to over-regulate it. But provide a good base, because for the first time in 50 years, we have a new way of storing data in a blockchain. So we shouldn't immediately try to regulate it. I think, yes, we have to. I would prefer to see a sort of self-regulation, just like the model Japan did, where there is a regulatory body that just self-regulates the industry. And from my viewpoint, that makes most sense because people are knowledgeable, and they'll be able to identify bad actors usually quite fast.
And they learn a bit from Mt. Gox, perhaps.
Oh yeah, you lost money there too?
No.
I lost so much money there. Yeah. Mt. Gox, Bitfinex, less than a trustworthy business partner when I started. No. I lost most of my Bitcoins. This is also the reason I created the chip implants at the time.
Yeah. That works.
Well, I don't store anything on it. It's still vulnerable to a $5 wrench attack. Like, hey, give me your password, and then I hit you on the head.
Yeah.
So, but if you're more discreet about it, then it definitely works.
Okay. So I think also in the Q&A, it can be very interesting, especially also for the teams. I think more on the entrepreneurial side. You've been working in the space for so long, really to exchange knowledge on how things actually are going when you're on the forefront of these developments. Because as a blockchain business, it is doable to get a bank account. As a crypto business, it's a lot harder. You can think all kinds of things about it, but I think that you managed to run a prudent business with 28 people and growing. It looks like it means you're doing something very right, and that we can learn a lot from that. So I think for now I want to thank you very much for all the answers, and that you took us with us on your journey. And if anyone wants to know more, you can join the Q&A with Martijn. A warm hand of applause.
Thank you, Ernestine.
Thanks for that. Before we go to the Q&A. We have 2 more deep dives to go in November. where you want to find answers in the discovery program is how you can do stuff. And especially entrepreneurs are quite well in how to do execution. Right? So in the entrepreneurial deep dive at Nijrode Business University, we're going to deep dive in the process of tokenization. And we'll do that with the the people from Ocean Protocol. We'll dive into how to set up a proper open source business. Elasticsearch just went to the stock exchange. It's a proper open source business. WordPress is an incredibly successful open source business. Who runs a website with WordPress? Right. Anyone paying for that? Okay. Still making millions? Yeah, okay. So it's very, very interesting that if you discover the potential of the open source business models, that you can actually build a very viable business on top of that. And what if you have a very successful company already? And what if you're in the process of commonizing that company, turning that company into a publicly owned infrastructure? Why would you do that as an entrepreneur? So we'll find out at Nijrode on November 13th. And after that, especially after the regulatory content we just had, it's also interesting to boil it down to the legal part of that. It's also one of the 4 elements Scott mentioned. And we'll do the legal deep dive at our partner at Loyens & Loeff. And the program will be announced shortly, but I'm very sure on the GDPR, the privacy part, it's going to be very, very interesting. On the smart contract part, it will be interesting because it has a lot of legal implications, especially when it's international. So we'll dive into that as well. And what we have also learned from last year and the year before from the winners, that the teams who were at these deep dives, they actually have a pretty better chance of winning the hackathon. So highly recommended. Then, Stefan, we're going to the decentralized Q&A. We did this for the first time on the tech deep dive last year. It worked very well because then you have enough time. It's almost an hour, I think.
45 minutes. And we're now going into the really complicated part of this conference.
Yeah.
As you have to choose. So first I would like to invite all speakers to come up here, and also Jan-Peter, Erich and Michiel, who are going to be moderating part of this. And obviously the Dutch Central Bank is the conference center, so you are going to crawl through some halls to get to the spot you need to be. All the speakers have corresponding numbers. We thought about this. We thought about this really well. It's now for you to choose one speaker, and to basically, if you're a number 3 or number 4, so go with Cassius or Martijn, you will follow these people who will now put on number 3 or number 4, please.
Yeah, right on time.
Yeah, you can take the paper and hold it up. That's number 1. No, number 3 and number 4. I told you, this is the most complicated part of the conference. So the people at number 4 are going to the Ljubljana Hall, and the people at number 3 are going to the London Hall. So please, everyone who is going with Cassius or Martijn, right now follow your number. And yeah, Martijn, obviously you're going to, yeah. It's a military operation.
You're doing well.
And the rest of you, please stay put for now.